Environment and Communications Legislation Committee, the Senate has referred to the committee the particulars of proposed expenditure for 2022-23 for the portfolio of infrastructure, transport, regional development and communications. The committee is due to report to the Senate on Monday, 16 May 2022, and it has fixed Friday, 20 May 2022 as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice from the Environment and Communications and Arts portfolios, and Friday, 27 May for the Energy portfolio. The committee's proceedings today will begin with the energy and emissions outcomes of the industry, science, energy and resources portfolio. The committee will be conducting today's hearing in person with some witnesses connecting via video conference. Under Standing Order 26, the committee must take all evidence in public session. This includes questions on notice. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to a committee they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as contempt. It is also contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The Senate, via resolution in 1999, endorsed the following test of relevance for answers given at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operation or financial position of the departments and agencies which are seeking funds in the estimates are relevant questions for the purpose of estimates hearings. I remind officers that the Senate has resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has the discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has resolved also that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. I particularly draw the attention of witnesses to an order of the Senate of 13 May 2009 specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. I incorporate the public immunity statement. Officers called upon for the first time to answer a question should state their full name and their position for the Hansard record. I now welcome Senator the Honourable Jane Hume, Minister for Superannuation, Financial Services and the Digital Economy. Representing the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts and portfolio officers. Minister, do you have an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
I also welcome Mr Simon Atkinson, Secretary of the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communication. Mr Atkinson, do you have an opening statement?
No, Chair.
Thank you. I now call officers from the department in relation to Program 5.1, which is Digital Technologies and Communications Services, and invite questions. And I believe Senator Urquhart has questions.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So last week, the Minister announced that the government will invest $31.6 million over the next 5 years towards online safety initiatives as part of the government's commitment to the new National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022-23. That includes $27.1 million for the eSafety Commissioner to continue and expand the vital work that Commissioner does, including supporting for victim survivors of technology facilitated abuse. So can you tell me what funds, if any, have been earmarked in the budget to support migrant and refugee women who are subject to domestic and family violence, given that these women have complex and intersecting issues that require a tailored investment?
Senator Bridget Gannon, Assistant Secretary Online Safety. The measures for the eSafety Commissioner under the Women's Safety Package are really for women more generally as a cohort. I don't think there's specific funding for those specific groups of women that you mentioned. I would note, though, that the eSafety Commissioner has a lot of resources on her website that do provide information and support to particularly vulnerable communities.
Okay, so there's no assured funding for developing specific models, campaigns or recovery pilot projects that target particularly migrant and refugee communities?
Not specifically, Senator, but as I said, that is something that the E-Safety Commissioner does as a sort of the normal course of business. So, at estimates last week, I asked a series of questions that were prompted by the tragic case of Tilly Rosewarne, a Bathurst teenager who died by suicide in February this year after suffering serious cyberbullying. I think Tilly's case demonstrates that in some communities in Australia at least, that there is no awareness of the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner or the cyberbullying regime which had been in place for 7 years. Last week I asked about, and I wanted to know more about the government advertising campaign for the online safety and the effectiveness of that. Last week you took on notice, the department did some questions about the online safety advertising campaigns. So I'm just wondering, can you now tell me how many advertising campaigns has the department run on online safety since the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner began in 2015? Senator, there's been, since 2014, there's been 3 lots of funding allocated for campaigns on online safety. The first was in the MyEFO 2018-19, where $9.4 million was allocated to a Start the Chat campaign. Then in the 2021 budget, the 21-22 budget, $5.2 million was allocated for a campaign that's currently running. We sort of refer to that as the Online Safety Laws We've Got Your Back campaign. And then in the budget last week, an additional $5 million was allocated to extend that most recent campaign. So there's been 3 times where funding's been allocated.
So 18 million, 5.2 and 5.
It works out at 19.6 total.
Okay. So can you provide me with the dates that the advertising campaigns will run and the amount that was spent? Oh, you've given me the amount, roughly amount, on each campaign.
We can certainly do that. So originally, Deputy Secretary, I think we can probably do that for the current campaign. Whether we've got the dates for the one back in the earlier one, I'm not sure. We might have to
Can
take
you give me a
note.
rough estimate and maybe come back on
We'll
notice?
see if we can get a rough estimate, yeah. But we can certainly give you more detail around the current campaign.
Yeah, sure.
Susan Charles, Assistant Secretary of Communications. The Start the Chat campaign started on the 15th of March 2019 and concluded on the 30th of June 2019. The current campaign started on the 30th of January and this year, and will conclude on the 30th of June this year.
And so just to clarify the amount for that, so the Start the Chat, what was the amount spent on that campaign?
I've got one. The Start the Chat campaign, it was allocated $9.4 million. And it ran from the 15th of March 2019
Yes,
to the
I've got
30th of June.
Miss Charles just
Sorry.
told me those dates, yes.
Sorry.
I just wondered about the amount.
So
And
the expenditure on that campaign, just to clarify, the information's also available on the annual report in the Department of Finance, but the total expenditure on that campaign was $8.6 million.
Okay, not 9.4.
That was the budget, so it included additional costs.
So the budget was 8.6, but the spend was 9.4.
Yeah.
Where did the...
Sorry, the other way round.
Oh,
So the
the other
budget
way
was
round.
the 9, the spend was 8.6.
Ah, okay, right. And obviously you haven't spent... What's the spend for
So the
this
current
year?
spend to date, noting that the campaign is still in market, we've spent about 1.4 million.
1.4?
Yes. We do expect to expend the whole value of that campaign by the end of the financial year.
Right. And so the 2022-23, that $5 million to extend, what will that be expanded? What will be in that? What will that cover, I guess?
At this stage, we'll look. The initial thinking is it will be an extension of the current campaign.
Right, so just the current campaign.
Yes. However, we are going to look at the evaluation that comes out of this campaign to just determine whether or not we need to make any changes, and also the media plan, whether or not we need to particularly target a cohort or, depending on the effectiveness of the campaign, where we might see some gaps. So that's one of the purposes of the future money in terms of looking at where we might target it.
Yeah. And can you tell me why was the decision made to extend the current campaign?
I think it was, first of all, it was a decision of government, but certainly we saw it as an opportunity to spread more information about the resources and assistance available to Australians who encounter harms online.
And part of what we've seen come through in the research now through this current campaign is that where people are getting exposed to the campaign, it has increased awareness levels. We've seen an increase in websites. We've seen an increase in people's awareness around the Online Safety Act. So there's definitely a need and a drive, as we know, to increase the awareness and make sure as many people know about the Online Safety Act. So I think, there is a legitimate case to go forward with running further education and promotional activity to support the Online Safety Act.
Okay, so you talked about three funding campaigns. So May 19, 20, 21, 22, 22, 23. Were there any, because I think my question was what had been run since 2015, so were there any between 2015 and the spend in May in 1920?
Senator, I don't think there were in that early period. There was, I think there would have been, there was sort of awareness raising and outreach work done by the E-Safety Commission itself, but I don't think there were campaigns run in that early period. I'm almost 100% sure of that.
So the department hasn't administered any between
campaigns
2015 and
that's
2019.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Can you tell me, was the 2019 ad campaign evaluated?
Yes, it was.
And can you tell me what did that evaluation examine and what did it find?
I've just got some top-line results that I can run through. I don't have a copy of the evaluation report. What we do understand...
Are you able to provide that evaluation report?
Yes, I'll take that on notice and I'll see what I've got on file.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding is, according to the evaluation, we've got higher than expected results in terms of website hits. So the eSafety website experienced a large amount of visitors and it averaged about 60,000 visitors per month throughout the campaign period.
How did that vary from that campaign period to normal?
We're seeing, I think there's different factors at play here as well. When the Start the Chat campaign, it had a different target on it. So the Start the Chat campaign was about talking to parents to get them to talk to their children about online safety. The current campaign is targeted towards women. And
I'm just interested in the evaluation of the 2019.
Yep. We also got a large percentage of recall, around 34% of people recalling the ad, which is above standard industry benchmarks. In terms of recognition, it was high for this campaign. So overall, it had a positive impact. It improved awareness levels and improved the access to information on the eSafety website.
So overall, would you say that the campaign was effective?
According to the evaluation report and the results I've seen, yes.
Okay. And what was the criteria for measuring that effectiveness?
I'll have to take that on notice. I don't have the list of the KPIs.
Is that outlined in that evaluation report?
I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, okay. So the focus of that campaign, was that the new cyberbullying scheme for children? So, or was it the Start the Chat? What was the focus of that campaign, the 2019 one?
So I think as Ms Charles said, the focus, I think Ms Charles indicated, was for parents to
Yes.
try and start conversations with their children.
Yes.
That point in time, obviously, you know, it was a different focus because the new Online Safety Act is only new, so the current campaign is picking up the measures that are added in the new Online Safety Act. So we can check this, but I think the focus would have been much more around parents through to children rather than
And it was,
in contrast to the current campaign, for example.
and it was connected to the Keeping Our Children Safe online package at the time.
Yeah, okay. And did these ads reach regional New South Wales?
It was a national campaign, and as such, regional got access to the campaign material as well.
And can you tell me how on what media did that reach into Far New South Wales?
That early campaign was in television, press, radio, outdoor, digital, social and search.
Right. And are you able to table the detailed media buy and implementation plan?
I can take that on notice, yes.
Yeah. And did the Start the Chat campaign, did that mention the availability of the cyberbullying spend? The cyberbullying scheme?
I would have to take that on notice. I wouldn't know. I'd have to take that on notice to look that up.
Right. Who did the 2019 scheme? So you can take on notice the detailed media buy?
Yes, in terms of the breakdown of the media. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. So basically the placement, the media, the dates and the spend, what that sort of total.
We should be able to provide a media plan, so
Great.
that should cover that.
That would be great. Who did the campaign target? Was there a particular age, particular geography, a particular gender?
The target audience, so the campaign's primary target audience for the campaign was pretty much anyone who looks after or cares for children and young people, so parents and carers of children and young people of school age, 5 to 18, siblings, extended family members of school-age children and educators in a school environment.
Okay, so it would have reached, say, female teenagers?
Yes.
Yeah, and was it directed particularly at, like, I think you said anyone, but was it particularly directed at children or parents and carers, teachers, social workers or police, or was it just more
Broadly,
general?
Yes.
And can you tell me what the creative was for the campaign, if you're able to provide a copy? Or
I
maybe
could provide
links?
a copy. I could table a copy, absolutely.
Thank you. Now, I understand that the ANAO did a review of the 2019 campaign, is that correct?
I wasn't in the department at the time, but I could look that up.
I'm not sure. So
I'm not sure.
We can take that on notice. I'm
Take
sorry,
that
I
on
wasn't.
notice.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you could take that on notice, and I have some questions, just a couple. If you could, my understanding is that they did, the ANO did do a review of that. Can you tell me on notice what did the ANAO find in relation to that campaign? And also, did the ANAO review of the campaign inform the current 2022 campaign in any way? And if it did, how?
I can take that on notice. And a copy of the ANAO report will be on their website. I can recall that report and there's Start the Chat being in there. I just don't know the details.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I'll come back to you on
Yeah,
that.
no, I understand it's in there, but I'm interested in how that then formed, whether it formed any view about the current 2022 campaign.
Yep.
So in relation to the current 2022 campaign, are these ads reaching regional New South Wales?
Again, this is a national campaign, and yes, it does extend into regional areas. So it is It has gone into metro markets in addition to regional markets, including, for example, northern New South Wales and southern New South Wales, Victoria, and other regional areas in other states.
Okay. And again, what's the media buy on that? Is it TV? Is it radio? Is it online?
It is TV, radio. The media spend for this campaign was 2.2 is the budget.
Yep. And are you able to give me a more detailed breakdown, detail of the ad buy, the schedule, placement dates? You've given me the spend and basically the media implementation plan.
Yes, I could take that on notice. At last estimates, we did provide and table the media plan and the creative for this campaign.
Okay. And again, who is the campaign targeted at?
The target audience for this campaign is women, adults who experience serious online abuse, so women aged from 18 plus. We're also looking at culturally called audiences and First Nation communities, and also people with disability.
Right,
But
so
predominantly it is the targeting up the broader cohort, women.
okay, and the geographic areas, is that broad or?
As I said, it's a national campaign. It's not gone to a specific regional level. One of the things we do note that online harm isn't specific to any particular area, so this is why one of the rationales for doing a national campaign.
Yeah. So the eSafety website's got copies of the videos in the We've Got Your Back ads. They appear to feature adults. Is that
That's correct.
Yep. So would it be fair to say that the We've Got Your Back campaign's focused on raising awareness of the new adult cyber abuse scheme?
The campaign is about the current online safety laws that were put in place in January, and they cover a number of schemes under that Act. And the focus of this particular campaign was to an adult audience. Mm-hmm. So the creative targets, though, resonates more closely with that audience, and hence why you would see more of that sort of age group and a mix of sort of males and females in that campaign.
So in relation to the current 2022 campaign, can you tell me why is the government undertaking this advertising campaign right now?
The campaign it coincided when the Act came into effect.
Yeah.
The campaign, although concludes on the 30th of June, the main elements of the campaign, including TV and radio, ran for 4 to 6 weeks. So those elements have now ceased and did cease some time ago. They ceased about the 27th of February. So the campaign has, the only part of the campaign running till the 30th of June is really just the search and some digital.
Right. So the ads in the current We've Got Your Back campaign mention the new online safety laws. So would it be correct to think that the government had passed these new online safety laws earlier than the ad campaign might have been run earlier?
I think that's a sort of hypothetical, to be honest, Senator, but certainly the intention was to align the campaign to raise awareness of the significant new schemes that were introduced.
Okay. So the government waited for the new Act to commence before running an
yeah, there was
campaign.
that's right. I mean, I couldn't speculate on the timing if things had happened earlier, but the plan was to raise awareness of the significant changes that were passed in January.
Okay, so why did the department run an online safety ad campaign in 2019 at the time that it did? What was the reason for that campaign at that time?
So I mean, I think in the sense there's a general answer, and there may be a specific event, and I think, as Charles mentioned, the fact that there was a package which included some reasonably significant additional funding for the eSafety Commission at that point in time. So it was, I suspect, a good opportunity to try to promote and raise awareness of the functions of the eSafety Commissioner at the time. The general point would be, I think there is, is recognised that there is always work to be done to make sure that to do what we can to raise the awareness of the existence of the E-Safety Commissioner and the things that the E-Safety Commission is able to consider.
Okay. So I asked earlier about the 2019 campaign that was directed at parents and carers, but you're not sure if it mentioned the cyberbullying scheme?
Without seeing that, without
Okay.
sort of refreshing.
Are you able to come back today whether or not that campaign mentioned the cyberbullying scheme?
If we can find details of the campaign, yes, we'd
Okay,
be
thank you.
happy to.
I've just got some questions around the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. In March 2021, 10 News broke the story about a Liberal staffer who was subsequently sacked, who performed a lewd act on a female MP's desk inside Parliament House. Subsequently, in December 2021, the whistleblower who informed 10 News was raided by police. Did the Minister or the Department provide any information or advice to the PMO or other government members or senators about the non-consensual sharing of intimate images regime in relation to the 10 News story in March 2021?
Senator, not that we in the department are aware of.
Minister, are you? No?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Did the PMO or any government members or senators seek any information or advice from the Minister or the Department about the non-consensual sharing of intimate images regime?
I would have to take that on notice, Senator, or perhaps it's a question probably better directed to the PMO.
From the department's perspective, not that we're aware of, no.
I understand that the raids were not conducted in relation to the e-safety regime, but what I'd like to know, are there any whistleblower protections in the non-consensual sharing of intimate images regime in the Online Safety Act?
Senator, the Online Safety Act sets out a complaints-based scheme, so it requires the target, the person whose intimate images have been circulated without their consent, to make the complaint. I can check my legislation. I think there might be a provision for someone to complain on behalf of the target, but it doesn't necessarily allow itself to a whistleblower type situation because it's complaints based.
Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to work out whether you've answered in saying that there are no whistleblower protections.
That's right, Senator.
That's right, because the way the scheme operates, it doesn't quite give rise to the prospect of a whistleblower. Because
So should there be whistleblower protections?
well, I think as Ms Gannon says, the way the scheme works doesn't give rise to a whistleblower scenario, because the complaint, the position behind the safety arrangements is not so much looking to deal with criminal behaviour and so it's more focused on dealing with and resolving concerns that victims of various activities covered by the various schemes have. And so it's driven by complaints from either those people or someone close to them. And as Ms Gannon says, there is a provision for, someone with an appropriately close relationship to someone who has suffered a particular form of abuse to be able to make a complaint to the E-Safety Commissioner, which then they can act upon. But it isn't a scheme that allows for, or the E-Safety Commissioner doesn't respond to sort of third parties raising concerns. There needs to be some connection to the alleged victim, and hence a whistleblowing type scenario really just doesn't arise. So I think the answer is no, not because whistleblower protections aren't an important concept. They just don't arise as necessary under the current scheme.
Okay. Okay, I've got some questions around the ABC budget.
We can.
Are you? Oh. Do you? Okay. You could have invited them.
Well, we thought we'd try and facilitate the adjustments process as efficiently as possible.
Good. Okay, am I right to go, Chair?
Of course.
Thank you. Mr Atkinson, on the 7th of February this year, the Minister for Communications announced funding for the ABC and SBS. His media release states that ABC funding was committed and growing funding. So can you tell me, in real terms, is ABC funding growing in line with the CPI, or is it actually decreasing in real terms?
It's growing with indexation, and indexation is based on one of the wage cost indices. Obviously, CPI is a general basket that reflects the whole economy rather than the prices of a specific activity set. The wage cost index are designed to reflect the real cost associated with a different type of business and maintain funding in real terms. And so they're indexed based on the types of costs that are incurred by the business.
So, according to a piece published by Jonathan Holmes on the 31st of March 2022, that was entitled "In Real Terms, the ABC is still going backwards." ABC funding is not indexed to the CPI but to a different measure, a weighted cost index that produces lower increases than the CPI. Is that correct? Is Jonathan Holmes correct in that assumption?
I couldn't go into the detail. Ms Sullivan might have the detail at hand as to exactly which WCI ABC is on. Yep. For instance, our department and all other departments are also... There's a basket of different indices that we get our funding against. Yep. And so benchmarking purely against CPIs, it's not really realistic for government entities. So to maintain real funding, we grow at the WCI baskets that are allocated to us.
So it does depend on which WCI basket that is linked to.
Yeah, and they're different over time though. The interactions with CPI and WCIs are different depending on what makes up the cost mix.
Okay.
But that's a Department of Finance thing.
Yeah, okay. Do you have anything to add, Ms Sullivan?
Nothing in particular. I guess the key thing is W's weighted cost index 6, and yes, it's a decision it's applied by Treasury, and the information's provided to us via finance.
Yeah.
So decisions around the index that's used, etc., is a matter for those agencies.
Okay. So do you know who decides on which index is used? Is it finance?
It's Finance Treasury.
Yeah.
But to the extent all of us in government are indexed, the ABC is indexed.
Yes. Yeah. So does the department acknowledge that the ABC's expenses, so things like wages, travel costs, equipment purchases and other goods and services that it requires, are likely to increase by at least as much as CPI and perhaps more?
I probably wouldn't be in a position to project that. That'd be something the ABC would have to talk to you about. But once again, I wouldn't have thought that theirs would be materially different to other parts of government that are also indexed.
Okay. So, Mr Atkinson, would you concede that the ABC's budget is growing in real terms? Or would you say that the ABC budget is decreasing in real terms?
I think that if it's... in nominal terms, it's definitely increasing. In real terms, I think it's probably about the same.
Right. About the same, that it's staying the same, or the projection is that it's increasing?
I think, with the exception of other measures, my read would be is it's about maintaining parity in real terms, would be my take.
Okay.
That's just general, though. I haven't done specific analysis.
Yeah. Okay. Does the department concede that if the ABC's funding is not going up as fast as its expenses are increasing, then in fact the ABC will be worse off in 3 years' time than it is now?
I think that I would say that any organisation that its expenses are outstripping its revenues...
it would have to be in a worse position.
We'll have a different circumstance.
You know, it's just, I'm not very good at maths, but my maths say that would be correct.
It's just the question of what optional expenses are.
Yeah.
Because you can always spend more money, right?
Yeah. But I mean, it's not about optional expenses, it's about necessary expenses to keep a business running.
Yes, but inside $1.175 billion, there's annual growth for indexation, and that gets applied to increases in input prices. And what I don't have is information as to what their flexibility around input prices are.
So is the rate of indexation slower than the rate of indexation for the ABC? Is that slower than the rate of indexation for SBS?
I don't think so.
It's
They're on the
same
same.
wages cost, yes. WCI 6 is applied to both.
So it's exactly the
It's the
same?
same.
Yeah, okay. Just got actually Senator Chisholm is going to pick up the next group in some questions around telecommunications.
Okay. Senator Chisholm, you have the call.
Thanks for that, Chair. I just wanted to ask some questions about the government's response to the Regional Telecommunications Review. I'm just going to read a passage from it. The Liberal and Nationals government will also consider smaller targeted and tailored grants that could be provided to service providers, charities, not-for-profits and/or community associations for service delivery. Such grants, for example, could fund solutions like free Wi-Fi and communal living spaces or the community, or provide equipment like low-cost mobile handsets or vouchers to subsidise service costs, particularly vulnerable regional cohorts. For example, even if mobile coverage is extended to an isolated community, low incomes may still mean handset and service affordability could be issues. $30 million of the CRA funding has been earmarked for affordability purposes. I was hoping the department could elaborate on what this means. Just provide a bit more detail about what it is.
So, Senator, I might say Mr. Patterson and Mr. Smithwaite might have may be able to add some more, but I mean, I think at this point it is, as you say, there has been a certain amount of funding. I think, as you said, earmarked for affordability-related measures. There are a number of different dimensions or things to consider when we think about affordability, and so at this point, the design work around precisely how we might use that funding to best tackle some affordability issues, that design work hasn't yet been done. So what you've read out is sort of, I suppose, some examples, but we haven't yet done we haven't yet started the process of more detailed design of how we will spend it. The point I suppose I would make is that, as I said, there are a number of different things to consider in terms of affordability, whether the issues are associated with people having access to devices, whether the issues are people having access to connectivity. In some instances, there are issues with people or communities having a combination of factors that affect their ability to access services. And at the end of the day, this is, affordability is one of a number of dimensions that affect access to services. Others could include sort of awareness, literacy, media literacy or digital literacy, education. So I suppose what I'm saying is that at this point we've got $30 million which we are proposing to use to direct towards addressing some affordability issues, but the detailed design of exactly how we'll use that we haven't yet undertaken. But Mr. Smithwaite or Mr. Patterson, have you got anything further to add?
I might start and then refer to Mr. Smithwaite. Lachlan Patterson, First Assistant Secretary, Communications Services and Consumer Division. Just to add a little bit on what Mr. Windeyer just said, to deal with affordability, you've got a couple of things that we will need to look at. Some of it is around the devices, the service charges, and so forth. So you've got different ways of approaching it. But one of the option that you raised is in relation to Wi-Fi, and in particular, we've got some projects on the Regional Connectivity Program doing exactly that in some Indigenous communities. So I might just ask Mr. Smithwaite, and it won't take very long, just to go through one or two of the projects we're doing at the moment, which is a good example of how you could tackle affordability.
Thanks, Senator. Phil Smithwaite, Acting Assistant Secretary, Regional Communications Branch. So through our regional connectivity program in a couple of remote communities in Western Australia, specifically Colombaroo and Jigalong, we're deploying a multiple NBN Sky Muster service using 4 of those services and essentially spreading Wi-Fi out through the community and into the major community buildings there. Effectively, what that means for the community is that they can call each other within the community at no cost. They have access to free VoIP calls. They also have access to a range of government websites at no charge. And in addition to that, if the individuals wish to use the internet more broadly, they can buy essentially a low-cost, what we call a data pin, so a certain amount of gigabytes that you could use, well, for example, for Netflix or some other purpose. But by and far, most of the sites that are relevant are free to access. So it's an affordability measure for an entire community in quite a tailored solution.
But they're things you're already doing. Is that separate to what's being talked about in the government's response to this?
The government's response is in particular calling out an affordability issue and allocating a sizable amount of funding within the RTIRC response. But you can build on examples we've used before. So we've got 2 projects, which is a good basis of fact for us, but it's about expanding upon known solutions that have been shown to work.
Right. What evidence did the government or department rely on to assert that affordable smartphone options don't already exist?
Sorry, Senator, I missed part of that question.
Senator, I think the question was what evidence did the government rely on to support the suggestion that affordable smartphone options don't exist? Was that the question?
Yeah, correct.
Well, I mean, I think the focus of this, the evidence base supporting the response to the RTIRC inquiry was the RTIRC review itself, which heard extensively from the community and from organisations, peak bodies and representative organisations throughout its review, and that's where the bulk of the evidence to support or explain the nature of the government response came from. It's also, I mean, it is. I think it's also just generally noted that there is a variety of price points for smartphones. Some are quite expensive, some are obviously less expensive, but even less expensive ones may, for some communities or cohorts of people, prove to be the barrier to being able to get and use a service. So, that observation, coupled with the evidence and views that came through in the review itself, is what led to the nature of the government response.
But wasn't that more about vulnerable consumers having more issue with the affordability of the ongoing cost of a plan rather than the smartphone itself?
Well, Senator, I think that was the a sort of point I suppose I was hinting at before, that there can be a number of dimensions to this, that having affordable plans or affordable connectivity or an affordable service is only one part of the puzzle, and it's not much assistance if people can't then also afford a device that can connect to that service. So that's why we need to think about this in a sort of holistic way, depending upon the particular concerns and issues faced by the vulnerable group or the individuals or the communities. And as Mr. Smurthwaite pointed out, we've already got projects which are examples of how you can tackle the affordability of a plan or the affordability of the connectivity to essential online services. But that doesn't mean that devices aren't something that need to be looked at as well. And depending on the nature of how people, cohorts and how they might need to use the internet, for some cohorts of people, the affordability question might relate to the ability to access laptops or computers rather than a smartphone. For other cohorts, it might be that the most useful and practical and relevant type of device for them is a smartphone, and therefore you need to consider, you need to think about the type of devices cohorts need and the relative affordability of those device types.
Okay. The government response also says that this could include, and I quote, vouchers to subsidise service costs to particularly vulnerable regional cohorts. Who would be providing these vouchers?
Senator, I think, as I said, we haven't moved to the design phase of exactly how we will target and administer the expenditure of that $30 million around the affordability measures. So at this point, I can't answer the question because we haven't designed or started the design process.
Okay. What about any sense of what those vouchers would be subsidising?
Again, Senator, I don't really want to speculate on something that we haven't yet done the work on. Yeah, I mean, the only point I would make is that to the extent there are affordability issues, to repeat, I suppose, what I said a minute ago, there are a number of dimensions that could be considered. You have mentioned the point about the ongoing costs of a plan. There's also the question of devices. There may be other relevant things as well, but we haven't done the design at this point.
Well, I suppose the issue with vouchers is they get used up. So is that actually a longer term solution to the affordability challenge?
Senator Chisholm, can I jump in there? I mean, obviously, I think the department's been very clear that the solution has not yet been formalised. But what I can say is that, and I'm putting on my Minister for Digital Economy hat here, is that we've committed to becoming a top 10 digital economy and society by 2030. One of the indicators of whether you are a top 10 digital economy and society is digital inclusion. This measure, this particular commitment is part of that. We want to make sure that nobody gets left behind as the economy moves on.
That's all very admirable, Minister. I'm just trying to get a bit of detail and am just a bit worried about how vouchers could be used and whether they're a long-term solution around affordability in these communities.
Well, I think the department have been very clear that the details of that plan have not yet been formalised.
I understand that, but I suppose I'm just asking questions about the voucher use in general and how that addresses the longer term problem. So I understand that they haven't done the detailed work on it, and I appreciate their honesty on that, but I suppose I was just trying to get a sense of voucher use, how that, they run out, by nature. Well,
I think we could have an ideological argument about the use or not use of vouchers for whatever it might be, but I think it's probably too early to get into the details of that when the planned form of delivery for this program hasn't progressed that far.
I mean, in effect, Senator,
have we got it?
Sorry, I was just saying, in effect, we just didn't want to preclude any options as we go into the consultation. We didn't want to sort of go out and talk to people about program design and have already made decisions basically from Canberra about what we thought would work. So we were keen to not preclude an option, which doesn't mean that it's necessarily the one we're going to implement.
It hasn't been ruled in, it just hasn't been ruled out. Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Have you got a timeline on when this sort of work's going to be done?
We'll be attempting to get as much of the work done by the end of this calendar year, Senator, to initiate the programs, to launch the programs, and then it'll run across the next 5 years.
Yeah. The response makes reference to vulnerable regional cohorts. Does this mean that whatever the government ends up doing in this policy area would not be available to vulnerable Australians outside of those regional cohorts?
Senator, I think that's something that again is sort of jumping ahead because we haven't yet done the design work. But I think the point you make is right, that there are some, when you look at the affordability question or you look at the digital inclusion questions more broadly, there are probably some dimensions or indicators which suggest that there are regional specific communities and cohorts which are particularly vulnerable, but there are other dimensions that don't necessarily break down along, can I call it, geographic lines. So we will obviously be thinking carefully about that as we work out who we're targeting and how best to target those cohorts, and therefore whether how best to sort of target the funding. So, obviously, one of the groups which is based in regional Australia is in remote Indigenous communities, and that has always been a cohort that comes through in work around digital inclusion. And then there's another component. There's the Regional Telecoms Inquiry makes particular specific reference to Indigenous as well. But so, for example, there are cohorts which are clearly regionally based, but the point you make is indeed right, that there are other dimensions of affordability or ways of thinking about affordability challenges that don't necessarily break down on regional versus non-regional divide.
I agree with Mr. Windeyer, and it's linked to different streams. So he mentioned Indigenous. So Indigenous, it's about the access. So you've got the infrastructure or the services people can use. It's about the affordability measure, which is what we're talking about now. But it's also about the ability to use it through the digital literacy component as well. So the streams will need to work together and be cohesive.
Okay. Who was consulted on this particular response prior to it being released?
So there might. I'll ask Mr. Patterson there would have been internal consultation within government as we were putting together the response. But in a sense, the consultation process for this exercise really starts with the consultation undertaking the Regional Telecommunications Review in itself, which then led to a series of recommendations, which is then the thing around which the government has formed its response to those recommendations. So the recommendations that are being responded to were the subject of extensive consultation through the independent review process.
That's correct. The one addition to that is the carriers were not consulted, the telecommunications carriers were not consulted on they didn't see the content on the government response, but they were asked what other initiatives they were doing within regional Australia that could be encapsulated within the response. But they weren't, but they didn't put into that was the extent of that consultation.
Okay. What about the NBN Co?
In the same context, Senator, the industry players were approached to offer things they were doing consistent with or relevant to the recommendations of the review, but they weren't. NBN was just included in the same way as other carriers were.
Okay. What about the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network?
They participated. I think you will find they participated in the review process itself. I don't think they were consulted between the receipt of the review and the preparation of the government response. But I'll take that. I'm looking to my colleagues to see whether that's correct. We can check that on notice for you, Senator.
Yeah, what might be useful, Senator, if I can I can take on notice the list of organisations that were written to ask if they had any initiatives they wanted to identify. I can't, off the top of my head, recall whether that particular organisation was consulted. In part of the response, obviously they were consulted during the conduct of the review. Again, I can't be certain, but I think they put in a submission as well.
Just on another related issue, the Liberal National Government's commitment to improving Indigenous connectivity is demonstrated through Target 17 of closing the gap, as well as the new Indigenous Digital Inclusion Plan. The development of the IDIP is being led by the Minister for Indigenous Australians. For the benefit of the committee, can you outline what this target is?
That's Jason Ashurst.
Just give me a moment, Senator. I'll see if we've got the. Can we just come back to that? We'll just try and see if we've got an officer that can. I don't have the specifics of the target in front of me. As you say, the work on the plan is being led out of a different portfolio, but we'll just see if we can get someone to the table who can at least respond to that question.
Okay. These are the sort of final set of questions I've got. So.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for someone to come to the table on that, I've just got a few questions around travel. So maybe I could do them while we're waiting for someone to come to the table to answer Senator Chisholm's questions. So can you tell me, Mr Windermere or Mr Atkinson, what international travel has been undertaken by the Department of Communications staff in the last 6 months, and for what purpose?
So we answer a question or notice about that as a standard. I'd have to take that on notice across the entire department.
Yes, by the Department of Communications staff.
Yeah, I imagine for multiple work purposes there's been trips.
Okay, can you tell me the names of the people who have travelled, where they've travelled to and what the cost of that travel is?
On notice, yes.
Okay. And more specifically, did staff from the department attend the Mobile World Congress 2022 in Barcelona in person?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Is this the first time that it's been possible to attend events in person because of COVID-19 travel restrictions?
No, as in the first time. So there's been other overseas travel. We have other overseas obligations,
Okay.
like as members of international forums and those sorts of things.
In the last 6 months?
I would have to check, but yes, I think so.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the World Congress in Barcelona, can you tell me the names of who travelled?
I think Mr Windy will be able to.
Senator, I was the only departmental official.
Just you?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the length of the travel?
The travel, we will get this for you on notice, yes. But the travel included Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and then going to London to talk to counterpart officers in the UK government, and then Geneva for International Telecommunications Union work. I think it was a couple of work days in each location, but I'm very happy we'll include that as part of the details on notice.
And the cost of that travel?
That will be included as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr Atkinson, did you receive something there that might assist?
Yeah, it's just the international organisation piece. The key other travel was to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organisation in Montreal.
But just on the communications portfolio side, you asked the question, when did, in a sense, travel start again? And I will check this on notice, but it is, there was a stage when certainly those international organisations we participate in, which is namely the International Telecommunications Union, the Universal Postal Union, and ICANN with respect to domain names, and associated regional bodies, so the Asia Pacific Telecommunity, for example. There was certainly a stage during COVID where they flipped to doing remote work,
yes.
But then they have begun to, they progressively then moved back to having meetings in person, and the practical issue for member countries is the rules of those forums in many instances say if you want to, the voting rules require you to actually attend in person. So the department...
Like the Senate.
Sorry?
Bit like
the Senate. And so, for example, during the COVID period, there was actually a significant congress in Côte d'Ivoire in relation to postal matters, and so the question we have to face is whether people could travel or whether we could get someone to appear from our post if Australia has one in that country. But yes, so we'll get you the details. It began to open up towards the end of last year from memory, but we'll get you the details.
Thank you. Okay, back to Senator Chisholm.
So, Senator Chisholm, we've got Jason Ashurst may be able to just reference the relevant closing the gap target that I think is we were talking to. Dr. Ashurst?
Thank you, Senator. Jason Ashurst, Assistant Secretary, Productivity and Technology Branch. My understanding is the target referred to here is target 17, which relates to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people having equal levels of digital inclusion.
Yep. The PMC website says the following in relation to recommendation 17. Nationally in 2014-15, 73.5% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 15 years and over access the internet in their home. There are no comparable data on home access to the internet for non-Indigenous people. This means that estimating a trajectory to achieve parity is not currently possible. Does the department agree with this statement that there is comparable data on home access to the internet for non-Indigenous people?
Senator, I think we'd need to have a look at exactly what the PMC site is measuring to work out whether there is, whether we've got a sort of perfect point of comparison. I do think whilst there is there are ranges of, data sources and information that talks about the number of Australians or even the number of households with access to the internet. I'm not aware off the top of my head of a data source that talks about the number of non-Indigenous. So we've got all of Australia information. The Indigenous policy area, by the sounds of things, may have information there talking about specifically with respect to Indigenous. I'm just not sure off the top of my head of a data source that actually splits out connection across Australia by Indigenous and non-Indigenous. But we'll check that on notice for you.
Sure. I suppose from a public policy standpoint, I'm just trying to get a sense of how that will be judged.
Well, I think, Senator, that's something we would need to talk to the colleagues in the other portfolio around how best to approach being able to most accurately measure progress towards that target. There is a lot of information around connectivity, but whether we need to do some more information gathering or some more targeted, get some more targeted data is something we'd need to talk to our colleagues about.
Okay. And whose job is it to develop and monitor that baseline? Is it your department or does it sit elsewhere?
Senator, it is one of the considerations under Target 17 and the Indigenous Digital Inclusion Plan is to understand better the availability of data and what additional data sources might be required, and it's something that we're undertaking jointly with the NIAA.
Okay. What about the Australian Digital Inclusion Index? Is that something that could be used?
I think that is a relevant source of data, but I'm not aware that it splits out the distinction between percentage of non-Indigenous homes connected versus the percentage of Indigenous homes connected. But it is a useful data source or information source that has been repeated for a number of years. Dr. Ashurst, is there anything particular to add on?
Thank you, Mr. Whittier. Only that there has been a recent change in methodology where it has focused less on Indigenous, but part of additional work around the Indigenous Digital Inclusion Index is to look at how Indigenous communities can be captured.
What do you mean by captured?
There's some additional work
being
undertaken to look at specific communities and measure and understand how we can best measure the digital inclusion within those communities.
Right, okay. Has the Indigenous Digital Inclusion Plan been released?
No, Senator, not yet. We understand it should be released shortly.
Okay. Is there any actual funding for it in the budget?
I don't think, Senator, there's funding for the Indigenous Inclusion Plan. However, what I'd point to is things like the fact that the Regional Telecommunications Inquiry response includes funding which can be used for connectivity, addressing issues in all manner of communities, including Indigenous communities. So I don't think you will find a budget line which is specifically around the inclusion plan, but there would be budget measures, for example, some of our regional telecommunications response, which are relevant to responding to concerns about Indigenous digital inclusion.
Okay. Should we expect that plan to be released before the election is called?
Senator, I think the best we can say is we understand it's shortly. It's not something that's been prepared by our portfolio, so it's not one that we have, we or the Minister for Communications is responsible for releasing.
Okay. Has the department been consulted by other agencies on possible program design responses and the role of the NBN in the telecommunications sector as part of the plan?
Senator, the consultations on the plan was undertaken by the NIAA, who led that work, and they consulted very widely through a series of consultation groups, a discussion paper, and also a working group that was established that included representatives of NBN and Telstra on it to consider the final plan.
Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
Righto. You done with this outcome?
Done with communications, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, we do have the people from the next outcome here as well, if you'd like.
Okay. Well, we can, people
Oh,
happy to...
sorry,
roll.
Chair, we do have one matter of clarification from Thursday night. We just want to correct, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
It's in this outcome.
In evidence, sorry, I'm just finding talking points. In evidence that I provided last Thursday to Senator Pratt in regard to questions around disinformation and misinformation in Ukraine, the question was asked about Minister Fletcher's letter, who he sent letters to, and whether they were signatories to the misinformation, disinformation code. When I provided that advice, I was incorrect, so I would like to correct the record. Sorry, I have my beautifully crafted notes, which I seem to have misplaced. Here they are. So the Minister did send 8 letters. 2 of those, so of the 6 people who received letters, 6 of them were signatories to the code, 2, however, were not, and they are Snapchat and Reddit. So I just want that corrected. Reddit. And they are not currently signatories to the Digi's online code.
Thank you.
All right, well, it sounds like people are happy to continue on to the arts, which is program 6.1. So do you want to change, do you want to do a shimmy shimmy? Yeah. We'll just do we'll just suspend now while we do the shimmy shimmy. So, welcome back. It's great to see you all again. We enjoy doing this every week, and this would be something we're going to do for the rest of our lives now. So, you should, get comfortable and bring a pillow to work and all that sort of stuff. Do you have any questions?
I certainly do.
Great. Well, we've got lots of questions, and after Senator Urquhart, I've got, I think, about 77 or 78 questions. So
He's
it should be
joking.
pretty long. And I
He
think,
did this yesterday. It's all
I
rubbish.
think we're going to cancel the break, so you'll just have to, it'll be fun though. There'll be a couple of laughs
Very pleased that the committee has such great humour this morning.
occasionally. Well, we look forward to your probing questions.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the arts and entertainment industry we know has been ravaged by COVID. It was the first industry that was shut down more than 2 years ago, and I think it's not even close to being fully up and running yet. Venues have closed, workers have left the industry. Other than a small increase in the RISE fund that was previously announced for this financial year, can you talk me through what does this budget do for this hard-hit industry? Because looking at the budget, I can't see very much at all, but hopefully, Dr Arnott, you'll be able to provide me with some information.
Yes, thank you, Senator Stephen Arnott, Deputy Secretary. So since the COVID pandemic began, the Australian Government has provided just close to $500 million in direct support to the arts and entertainment sector. In this budget, the government has agreed to a further round of RISE of $20 million. The government has also provided the National Museum with some additional funding in response to COVID. It has extended the...
How much is the National Museum?
21.8 million.
21.8, yep.
And also the government has announced an additional round of the Screen Fund for regional cinemas and has extended the temporary interruption fund for the screen sector.
And how much
until
is the Screen Regional Fund?
Screen Regional Fund is $20 million all up.
That was in this budget?
That was in the last budget, but it was...
No, sorry, my question was, what's in this budget?
Yeah, well, they announced another round of the Screen Fund
Right,
in the context of this budget.
That's value is how much?
The round itself is $9 million.
9. And what was the final one, Mr Arnott?
Sorry?
What was the final one?
Oh, they extended the temporary interruption fund for screen production till the 30th of June 2022. And that's
the
a $50
value
million,
of
$50 million fund.
50?
Yep.
Could I just add, Senator, those new measures obviously build on the base funding, annual funding. So total annual funding in 22-23 is about 840 million.
842 million. Correct, yeah.
So the budget shows a cut. The budget shows a cut to Screen Australia's funding from 39.4 million in 21-22 to 27.8 in 22-23. So overall screen funding drops from 195 to 150 million. At estimates last week, you said this reduction was because of terminating COVID funding. So my question is, will the termination of this funding result in fewer productions, fewer Australian stories on our screens and obviously from that fewer jobs?
Senator, no, because the base funding for Screen Australia remains approximately the same. As I said last time, the reduction in funding from 2021-22 to 22-23 is due to the termination of the Screen Fund, for which there was 12 million provision to Screen Australia this financial year.
The industry says that audience numbers for shows and concerts and festivals are not back to the 2019 levels yet, and won't be for some time for a range of reasons, obviously. But so the sector is still in serious trouble. I don't think there's any disputing that. So why is that support being cut in this budget or not continued? Why is it not being supported?
So, Senator, there is actually a tail of support that runs to the end of 22, to the end of 21-22, if that makes sense. So 21-22 is the highest year for funding across the course, even more than last year. So that runs until the end of this year. So this year's about around $1.07 billion. And then it starts to taper off in the 2 years after that. So there's still elevated funding in 22-23, and then it tapers back to a normal level in 23-24, which takes into account what we're hoping is for, as we move through this phase of COVID, for us to move back to a normal operating tempo for the arts and creative industries.
So what did you say, how much did you say was the 21-22?
It's about $1.07 billion.
How many?
$1.07 billion. 71 technically.
Yeah.
At risk of being corrected by the Treasury Ministers.
Peak Body Life Performance Australia said the budget fell well short of what's needed. The industry lost $1.4 billion in revenue in 2020, with further significant losses in 2021 when Melbourne and Sydney were locked down. They are facing a severe skill and labour shortage they describe as the worst ever experienced by the industry in living memory. So is there anything in the budget to address that skill shortage?
Not specifically for the arts sector, but we obviously have two agencies that are continuing to train artists, the National Institute for Dramatic Art and the Australian Film, Radio and Television School, both of which have their funding continuing and ongoing at current levels. There is a significant skills package in the budget, as I understand it, but we haven't looked at that closely to see how that might work for the arts at this stage.
Can you tell me, Mr Arnott, why is the government cutting funding for regional arts from $18 million this financial year to $7.5 million next year?
So that's again due to terminating COVID funding. I can outline that for you, but there was a number of initiatives that regional arts received to address COVID issues, and that's also terminating at the end of this financial year.
So just in relation to the Temporary Interruption Fund, can you tell me how much of this has been spent or allocated to date, and how many productions has this spending gone on?
Yes, I can tell you how many productions. If you just give me 1 second. Just give me a second to find it. Have you got that? Yeah, okay, you go.
Yes, so there's been 87 applications approved.
So 87, and how much has been spent or allocated to date?
Well, because of the nature of the fund, there's been no claims to date against those.
So none. Is that correct? None? No.
Yes, but it's not a grant.
No, I understand that, but
Yeah.
none's been spent or allocated.
Yeah, no, what we say is no claims have been made.
So just, we're seeing, I think, all around the country an increase in COVID cases just in time for winter. So I guess I wanted to sort of get an idea of why the department believes that now's the right time to reduce COVID supports for the arts. Why is that COVID money? Because that seems to be a trend, that the COVID funding has been cut, but yet we're seeing exponential growth in COVID cases all around the country.
I think the key thing is less case numbers and more restrictions on movement and capacity for the sector to operate. During the previous years, there were very significant lockdowns that actually prevented, government decisions were preventing activities. And obviously through that period, the arts and creative sector and the aviation sector were the two sectors that got very specific supports through that, in addition to all of the other economy-wide measures. I think that if there were significant closures in future, so more lockdowns or anything like that, based on those cases, I think the government would, reconsider.
But the reality is, Mr Atkinson, there's not going to be lockdowns. I mean, we've all heard we've got to live with COVID, that's the case. So the reality is the cases are growing. The industry is still in decline, and yet the COVID support has been stopped.
I don't think I think the industry's coming back. I don't think it's...
But it's not there yet. It's a long way from coming back.
It's a long way from back. But
Absolutely.
it's in incline from a closed...
But it's still not there. It's still not back where it was.
Yeah. And so that's why I was saying that the tail of COVID measures continues through 22-23 and doesn't move back to sort of a normal arts trajectory until 23-24.
Does the department anticipate an increase in COVID-related cancellations for the arts sector in the coming months?
Sorry, an increase compared to the last couple of years?
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of...
Well,
it's a lot of cancellations.
I guess if we use from today, I mean, there are a lot of people who aren't going out. We know that. People are worried about going out in big groups and all that sort of stuff. So has the department done any sort of...
Well, my expectation would be, it's the word increase, because obviously we had lots of cancellations over the last... I would expect that there would be some cancellations going forward. But hopefully not on the scale we saw over the last 2 years.
But you don't know that?
Well,
No.
Are any plans for a national COVID insurance scheme for live entertainment and events still being considered?
There was no such scheme announced in this budget.
And given that there's been no long-term increase either for the department or for any of its agencies, and COVID support now is being turned off, basically, where are the organisations who benefit from RISE, for example, now going to go for support? Where do they look to? Where do those organisations say, we need help?
I think the Secretary was clear that a further 20 million has actually been allocated to RISE, so they can still turn to RISE.
I'm asking the Secretary where people go. So where are there other buckets of money?
After that next round. Well, I'm hoping that RISE actually will achieve its objective in getting things back on, getting the sector back on its feet. And the additional $20 million will be a part of that. It's currently supported 541 projects over more than 4,500 locations. So it's had a relatively big impact. I'm hoping with the move to less closures and lockdowns and those sorts of things in the management of COVID going forward, that we won't need things like RISE to support the industry, and particularly those elements of the industry that didn't need that sort of support before COVID.
But there's nothing really in the budget where people can go if that's required.
There's no long-term version of RISE, no.
Senator, I'll just add to that RISE actually has a really long tail, and so there's still several hundred projects that have to be rolled out yet. So, and that was anticipated. That was what we contracted them for. So, the actual impact of RISE will run for another couple of years.
Okay, thank you. I've just got a few questions, and this is my final group, around the use of the ABC logo. So, I'm happy to throw to you, Mr. Atkinson.
ABC logo?
Sorry?
I think that would have been for the last...
No, the ABC logo, it's for the department. So can you tell me, have either the department or the Minister's office made any representations to the ABC about the use of ABC intellectual property?
So this is a comms question, not an arts question. But Richard,
Senator,
Well, you're still here, so
yeah,
we can go through
that's
that.
fine.
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I'll just switch.
Well, can I just...
the answer is no, Senator.
I just intercede here briefly just to aid the committee. We have had extensive discussion about this issue with the ABC's Managing Director.
Yeah, these are departmental questions. So, so if either the department or the Minister's office asked the ABC to act on the use of the ABC logos by others?
No, Senator. Not the department,
Sorry,
no.
I do want to intercede here, just to clarify something. So, we've had extensive discussion about this issue with the Managing Director of the ABC. He has committed to take certain actions in relation to the ABC's logo. Is that something that the ABC looks after itself, or does the department have some role here as well?
We
Has
don't
no
have
role.
role. We have no role.
Has no role. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Was the department or Minister's office involved in any way in drafting the questions asked by Senator Bragg about the use of ABC logo by the ABC Friends?
We certainly weren't.
No.
Okay. Have either the department or the Minister's office asked the ABC to act on the use of the ABC content, such as photos, still images, radio or TV contact or online news extracts by others?
We
No,
haven't.
department's had no role.
Is the department aware of government members and senators using the ABC logo or other ABC intellectual property or content?
No.
The Minister for Communications, Paul Fletcher MP, still has a post on his LinkedIn that uses the ABC logo, his so-called Budget Explainer, published on the 17th of August 2020. Has the Minister ever been contacted by the ABC in relation to the Minister's use of the ABC logo?
You'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
No. Yeah.
No?
No.
Okay. That's it, thank you.
Okay. Okay, good. Just thinking about a few things.
Yeah, Chair, you've just been asked whether somebody else writes your questions for you.
Well, I should, I guess, address that. I mean, I think people know I'm very difficult to script at the best of times, but I'm always open to taking suggestions on questions from a whole range of sources, so look forward to raising it. Sorry, you want to say something?
Can I just ask a clarifying question of the questions that Senator Urquhart was asking regarding the COVID assistance to the arts sector and the drop in that. And Mr Atkinson, you said you hoped that we don't see the closures and the cancellations that we'd seen. Were not a lot of the need for the support mechanisms we put in place, one of the reasons was because shows just couldn't go on? It wasn't that they were cancelled, it was that due to restrictions and lockdowns in the various jurisdictions, you couldn't have a stage show on, you couldn't put on your country music festival or anything like that. So would that be part of the reason why we're not expecting as much need? Because all the states have said that they are now going towards a worst case scenario for restrictions in the future.
Yes, Senator. That's precisely right.
And just a question for Mr Arnott regarding the regional arts funding. The decline, you say, is due to the removal of those COVID support mechanisms. So does that mean I think it was 7.1 million available for regional arts is back at the same level it was pre-COVID, or is it less, or...?
It's certainly not less, Senator. I think, 7.529 million. And, that would be a similar level to what you would expect, and it's predicted to increase to 7.983 million over the forward estimates.
Right. And is that through a range of different programs?
Yes, yeah, that would include the Regional Arts Fund, Festivals Australia, yes.
Right. Thank you.
Right, well, before I close the proceedings, I should just say I'm an equal opportunity question receiver. If people have questions they'd like me to ask, I'm happy to take questions, and I maintain my policy of equal opportunity for all. That does conclude the committee's budget estimates hearings for this round. Senators are reminded that written questions or notice should be provided to the Secretariat by close of business Thursday, 14 April, and I'd like at this stage to thank very much the Hansard Secretary, all the staff and the officers from the department, and of course the Minister for being here today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.